Hey everybody, Andy from Sound of Muzak. It is good to finally be back. And we are here with 1966 finally. only 6 months later, but that's okay. Life's been a little crazy, but I'm hoping to pick the pace back up with the channel, as I said in the update video that was released the other day. So just a few things and we'll just get right into my top 10. I'd said in the 1965 video that this is sort of my opportunity to talk about all different kinds of music that I like that are not David Bowie or King Crimson. I hope that some of these records that I talk about are, records maybe you're not as familiar with, and, it's always cool getting people into new music. And speaking of music, I'm going to be linking my Rate Your Music page down below. And even though this is just a top 10, the list will carry on. So I will have other records that I've listened to in 1966. I'm hoping one day I can have a top 100 for every year. That'd be pretty neat. And again, Rate Your Music, I can't stress enough. If you don't use Rate Your Music, check it out. I've been an RYM user since 2007 now. So going on for a long time, and it's really how I get into 95% of my music. So Rate Your Music, can't recommend it enough. Also with this series, I give a brief overview of the year that we talk about. I will give you my 5 honorable mentions, so not necessarily a top 15, because I'll just breeze through those 5. Again, this is just a top 10. As we get further and further. All right, so here we go. 1966, John Lennon is quoted in a London newspaper saying the Beatles are more popular than Jesus, resulting in Beatles record-burning events across the U.S. Herb Alpert and the Tundra Brass have 4 albums simultaneously in the U.S. top 10. The Beatles also performed their last official concert at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. NBC had a hit TV show starring the Monkees, featuring the comedic exploits of a Beatlesque pop group. In April 1966, for the first time since January of 1964, the US top 10 does not have a UK band in it. Also, so-called garage bands make a big impact in the US, some of those which will be on my list. And speaking of some great garage rock bands that would later become psych rock bands, just some bands I want to point out really quick, again, some which will be on my list. You have bands like Love, the Monks, the Remains, the Seeds, the Sonics, and the 13th Floor Elevator, all releasing phenomenal records this year. For the Billboard year-end Top 100 chart for 1966, the top song was The Ballad of the Green Berets by Sgt. Barry Sadler. The best-selling album worldwide was the Beatles' Revolver. And that is 1966 in a nutshell. So 66 is kind of interesting because looking back at 1965, all genres were relatively stripped back. I don't mean that in a bad way, but whether it was folk, blues, jazz, or even rock, 65 very much had a laid-back sound. Now, transitioning to 1966, we have expanding production techniques, we have more guitar distortion, and Moog synthesizers. Love the Moog. So this is the starting point for psychedelic rock. And it's interesting, when I was prepping for this list, the 6 months that it took, I remember this year being a stronger year as a whole. And as far as psychedelic rock goes, very much while the beginning, we're just getting started, very few records, I would say, this year take on full psych. I would almost say that some of these records that are at least on my list, maybe 2 or 3 tracks, have that psychedelic influence, but it really won't be until next year, 1967, where psychedelic rock is in full effect here. But nonetheless, we have some very important and influential records that would go on to really just not only influence the rest of the 1960s, but music today. All right, really quick for our honorable mentions. I have the psychedelic sounds of the 13th Floor Elevator by the 13th Floor Elevator. I also have East West by the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. I also have Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme by Simon and Garfunkel. They actually released 2 records this year, the other being The Sounds of Silence. That's an okay record. I think the follow-up's just a little better. We also have a quick one by The Who. Some might consider it a sophomore slump. For me, personally, I find it to be a rather intriguing transitional record. And then I also have Monk Time by The Monks. This is a record I discovered maybe 10 years ago, and it's one of those really weird exceptions that if the bonus tracks that were later released on the CD reissue, if they were included on the original vinyl release, then this record for sure would be in my top 10, but those bonus tracks are unfortunately not canon, so there you go. So those are my 5 honorable mentions. Let's get right into the top 10, starting with number 10. We've got the Fugs' second record, the second album. Some refer to it as Fugs 2. I even think on some reissues it's just simply titled The Fugs. But it is their second record nonetheless, and this record is just complete, utter madness. Completely ahead of its time. The best way I can describe the sound of this record is it's the sound of Frank Zappa having the Dead Kennedys as his backing band. And this record was just barely released before Freak Out, which we may be talking about in a bit. This record is just full of satire. And all satire aside, I think that this record, it just, to me, embodies rock and roll. It might not be impressive from a technical standpoint, but this record takes risks that nobody else was doing at this time. I would say the execution overall is probably there 80% of the time. I just think this is just such an intriguing record. And so did David Bowie, fun fact. In 2003, an article for Vanity Fair, which I'll post also in the link below, he had listed this as one of his 25 favorite albums in an article called Confessions of a Vinyl Junkie. And again, I'll post that below. Some of my favorite tracks off this record are I Want to Know, Coming Down, Dirty Old Man, but my favorite track, hands down, is a song called Morning Morning. And the best way I could describe this track is when profanity and profoundness unite. This record I give a 4 out of 5. Again, that's 4 out of 5 stars. Phenomenal record. Can't recommend it enough. So that is my number 10. All right, moving on to number 9. I gotta say, an overrated record, but it still cracks the top 10 barely. And that is Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde. Look, it's a great record. Like Highway 61, an important record for sure, and still to this day. For me, this record, more than anything else, it just suffers the double album effect. It's too long. I drift off towards, side 3 with this record. And, truthfully, I just think there are several songs that could be a minute, even 2 minutes shorter. But having said all that, Blonde on Blonde, hands down, has some of Dylan's best moments. And really, at its best, it has those hazy metaphors and those silhouettes that I've come to love on the last few Dylan releases. I think my issue, too, is this record is just a little too cryptic with the lyrics. Maybe it's just, too intelligent for my brain here, who knows. But I felt like Highway 61 had a good balance of cryptic with some hard, more hitting lyrics as well, too. I guess some directness is where I'm getting at. But again, I can't deny this record's influence. Some of my favorite tracks off this record are Memphis Blues Again, Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat, and Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. The best way I could summarize Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, other than being another phenomenal Dylan epic, is a quote from none other than Tom Waits. Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, it is like Beowulf and it takes me out of the meadow. This song can make you leave home, work on the railroad, or marry a gypsy. I think of a drifter around a fire with a tin cup under a bridge remembering a woman's hair. The song is a dream, a riddle, and a prayer. As great as Tom Waits summarizes Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, for me, my favorite track, hands down, is Visions of Joanna. And I'm going to quote another musician, Richard Butler from the Psychedelic Furs, because I think he summarizes this song perfectly. I think the words are great, and the imagery and the verses is fantastic. His voice is fantastic, and the whole song is so beautiful. Kind of mournful, but beautiful. The whole mood of it is fantastic. I think I pointed this out when we talked about Highway 61 for 1965, and I know there are a lot of people that are not a fan of Dylan's vocals, and I completely understand that. But he has moments where his voice not only works, but it is beautiful in a pure way that I can't explain. Maybe on a technical, standpoint, it's not great, but just the way that he enunciates certain words and phrases, I don't think anybody else does it better, at least for this kind of music. Blonde on Blonde, I give a 4 out of 5. Again, that's 4 out of 5 stars. Still a great record. All right, my number 8, probably the hardest record to get into in my top 10, at least for this year. And that's going to be Unit Structures by Cecile Taylor. If you watched my 65 video, you knew some jazz was going to make this list as well, too. I mentioned in the 1965 video when we talked about John Coltrane's A Love Supreme that was the last Coltrane record that I was really into. After that, he got a little too free jazz for my liking. And while Unit Structures is no exception to that, I feel like there's enough hard bop in it for me to still enjoy. Really it comes all down to Taylor's piano playing is what makes this record work for me. And along with Ornette Coleman, Cecile Taylor was very much a pioneer in the free jazz subgenre. What I really like about this record is that it utilizes a tonalism, but with other techniques, specifically improvisation. To quote Rate Your Music reviewer, one of the crucial moments of free jazz, the tense spates of unit structures were clinical, logical constructions that perpetually felt like they were veering into total disarray, yet wondrously stayed intact, moving away from the human element that had characterized jazz up until that point. I think that's a good summary there. Some of my favorite tracks off this record are the title track, Unit Structure, which is actually broken into 3 pieces, Unit Structure, As of a Now, and Section. But my favorite track off this record is the opening track, Steps, and I love this song because you listen to it and it's the sound of going on an adventure and just not knowing what to expect. Unit Structures, I give 4 out of 5 stars, and that is my number 8. Number 8. All right, at number 7, I have Wild as the Wind by Nina Simone. Last year, Pastel Blues made my top 5. I believe I had it at my number 3. And I got to tell you, Wild as the Wind is slowly becoming my favorite Nina Simone record. We're like almost there. It just continues to grow. What's interesting about this record is, what if I were to tell you that this record just has songs that are just a bunch of outtakes put together by a record company? That's right. In addition, the record label put this out without Nina's consent, and yet it's amazing. It's amazing. One of those very weird moments where the record execs got something right. But I digress. What I love about this record is it just has this romantic atmosphere to it. Yet there are moments where it could just be so hard-hitting, especially when it comes to the more political tracks. Some of my favorite songs off this record are What More Can I Say?, Lilac Wine, and her rendition of Wild as the Wind. I think I talked about in our Station to Station episode for Bowie that I'm always neck and neck when it comes to the Bowie and the Nina versions. And I don't know if it's just because I've been listening to this record a lot lately. I gotta tell you, I'm leaning more and more towards the Nina version being the superior version. But we're like pulling hairs because they're both renditions are just special in their own right. The true masterpiece, though, is For Women. This song. Her vocal delivery, it's just so heartbreaking. And the lyrics about racism towards African Americans really make the broken heart shatter. This song tells the story of 4 different African American women. Each of the 4 characters represent an African American stereotype in society. Sarah, Sephironia, Sweet Thing, and Peaches. really, the arrangement of this song, it's a rather simple one with just piano, flute, electric guitar, and electric bass. Again, it's Nina's performance. Her vocals are just full of emotion, yet there's this frenzied and dissonance to it as well, too. But it all comes down to the final climax, that scream at the end where she belts the name of the last character, Peaches. It just chills even just talking about it. This record, like I said, is phenomenal. It continues to grow on me. I'm giving Wild as the Wind 4 out of 5 stars. All right, my number 6, we have 5D or Fifth Dimension by The Byrds. The Byrds' sophomore release made my top 10 last year, Turn, 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 and this record is just incredible. Unfortunately, we do have the departure of Gene Clark, but he did co-write the song that everybody knows off here, which is 8 Miles High, and we'll talk about that in a second. Make no mistake, this is a psychedelic record. It may not have the backmaster guitars or the tape loops, but it's psychedelic. A review I read on Rate Your Music, I think, summarizes why this is a psychedelic record perfectly. This is West Coast psych. It just has that vibe, as opposed to the style of psychedelic rock that aims to orally recreate the psychedelic experience. You got the self-titled track 5D, which is space folk. You have Mr. Spaceman, which is psych rockabilly. And you have a track like I Come and Stand at Every Door, which to me just sounds like it could be in a horror film. We have to talk about 8 Miles High, though. This song, man. This song was influenced by the music that David Crosby specifically was listening to, which was John Coltrane and Ravi Shankar. The guitar solo in the beginning is the sound of John Coltrane picking up the electric guitar. And then we go right into the intricate, droney vocal performance throughout. This is a psychedelic rock masterpiece. As monumental and as important as 5D is, it really does dip after 8 Miles High. But the Byrds do improve on this sound with their next 2 releases, Younger Than Yesterday and the Notorious Byrd Brothers, which may make my top 10 for those years as well. But again, this is a significant record. Some of my favorite tracks, again, are the self-titled track, 5D, Mr. Spaceman, I See You, which Yes covered on their debut album. But I'm going to be a cliche here. My favorite, hands down, off the record is 8 Miles High. It's just a jazz rock psychedelic fusion, whatever you want to call it. It's just triumphant. I love it. It's one of my favorite songs of the 1960s. 5D, I am also giving 4 out of 5 stars. All right, we're hitting the top 5. Here we go, top 5. My number 5 is Freak Out by the Mothers of Invention. I've been referencing this record quite a few times already, and I'm going to use a quote from the man himself, Frank Zappa. On a personal level, freaking out is a process whereby an individual casts off outmoded and restricting standards of thinking, dress, and social etiquette in order to express creatively his relationship to his immediate environment and the social structure as a whole. There you go. This record is Zappa laughing at everyone and everything involved with 60s pop culture. Very tongue-in-cheek. But all that aside, this is a freaky record, make no mistake. Even though he might be mocking certain music fads such as psychedelic rock, a track like Who Are the Brain Police was some of the most psychedelic music, not even just this year, but throughout the 60s. There's debate as to whether or not this is the first double record. It did come out a few months before Blonde on Blonde, so it does beat that record. As far as I am able to come up with, it seems like that might be a true statement. I don't know. Somebody let me know in the comments below. But like Blonde on Blonde, it does suffer the double album effect. It does get too long after a while. Side 1 is incredible, but once we get to the end of the record, with the Help I'm a Rock suite, It drifts as far as I'm concerned at that point, to the closing track just barely being listenable. I think Zappa even said that was a song that he never got to finish. But all of that aside, some of my favorite tracks off this record are Hungry Freak's Daddy, I Ain't Got No Heart, Who Are the Brain Police, and Go Cry on Somebody Else's Shoulder. But my favorite track off this record is Trouble Every Day. It's just this really awesome blues rocker, combined with the lyrics about the Watt riots that were happening that year. Zappa's guitar is fantastic in this song. It shows why he's probably the greatest rock guitarist. But lyrically, it sounds like something that Dylan would write. I do have to point out with this record, unless if you have the original vinyl release, the definitive version, really the vinyl release is the definitive version, but on Spotify, or if you still collect CDs, you gotta check out the Mofo Project. That is the second most definitive way to listen to this record, as they do use the original vinyl stereo mixes. Completely changed my perception of this record, since I don't have a vinyl copy yet. This record is just fantastic. Once again, another record I am giving 4 out of 5 stars. All right, at number 4, I have Speak No Evil by Wayne Shorter. If you recall, in 1965, Juju was one of my honorable mention records, and Speak No Evil kind of picks up where that record left off. It's just, to me, more refined. Wayne Shorter's a guy that has a rather interesting career. And I say that because this is still right around the time when he was performing in Miles' second great quintet. And he would go on to be a part of the Fusion era for Miles, and then later in the 70s form Weather Report with Joe Zenwall. But what I really like about Speak No Evil is it very much has the influence of not only Miles, but even Art Blakey, who Wayne played in the early 1960s. Speak No Evil just really showcases how great of a composer Shorter really was and still is. This is one of the most expressive jazz records that I've ever listened to. The mood that he was going for, I think cut that out too. The mood that Wayne was going for, I think he summarizes best himself in an interview that he did at the time. I was thinking of a misty landscape with wildflowers and strange, dimly seen shapes. The kind of places where folklore and legends are born, and then I was thinking of things like witch burnings too. There you go. The lineup on this record is great too. You've got the great Herbie Hancock on piano, you've got Ron Carter on bass, and Elvin Jones on drums. Oh, and of course we have Freddie Hubbard as well on the trumpet. Top-notch musicians who also went on to do great things before and after this record. This is a great jazz starter, along with Kind of Blue and Love Supreme. I think Speak No Evil is a record that is worth checking out after those two records specifically. Some of my favorite tracks off this album are Witch Hunt, the title track Speak No Evil, and Dance Cadaverous. However, my favorite track would be the song Infinite Eyes. This is just a gorgeous piece. It's one of those songs where you just need to close your eyes and just shut off the rest of the world to really just take in the beauty. It's great. Just fantastic. Speak No Evil, I give 4 out of 5 stars. And that is my number 4. All right, my number 3 is my first and only 4.5 star record, which means number 1 and 2 are going to be 5 stars. But my number 3 is going to be Face to Face by the Kinks. I love the Kinks. I mentioned in my update video that I will be doing my own solo discography, I can talk, discussion series on the Kinks. Really looking forward to doing that. So I don't want to get into this record too much, since I'll go into it more in depth. This is right around the time when the Kinks were banned from all live US performances, which while I think is the reason why many people consider them second tier, the benefit of that is I feel like this really allowed Ray Davies to detach himself from writing global music that everyone could relate to at the time, making it difficult for most to get into this band. But I love this record. This is very much the beginning of what's to come. Their next three records, Something Else, Village Green Preservation Society, and Arthur or the Decline and Fall of the British Empire. But this is a great starting point to those records. You have the song Sunny Afternoon, which is just this hazy, moody masterpiece. It's pure pop perfection. I would put this right at the best of Brian Wilson, Lennon, and McCartney psych pop tunes at the time. Hands down, Ray Davies' first masterpiece. But also we got to mention brother Dave Davies, who on this record for the first time really understands the dynamic behind the concept of lead guitar playing. With a track like Most Exclusive Residence for Sale, God, the guitar in that is just thumping throughout. Also, the singles and the bonus tracks that would appear on later releases, you can't go wrong. With tracks specifically such as Dead End Street, Big Black Smoke, and Dedicated Flower Fashion. All those tracks are worth checking out, and they're on several Kink Comp releases as well. Some of my favorite tracks off this record are Rosie Won't You Please Come Home, Too Much on My Mind, Most Exclusive Residence for Sale, and Little Miss Queen of Darkness. But my favorite song, hands down, is Rainy Day in June. This is just one of those songs, kind of like Infant Eyes, that time just completely stops for the 3 minutes or however long it is when I listen to this song. It's one of the Kinks' best non-singles. Everything about this track is just splendid. The writing is sophisticated. The atmosphere throughout is just soaring. The sounds, the soundscapes on this track with nature don't sound dated whatsoever. Very contemporary. I love this song so much. As I mentioned before, this record I give 4.5 out of 5 stars, and my only one on this list. All right, we're down to the top 2. Ooh, here we go. My number 2, first of all, it's a 5-star record. This is one of those records, and we're going to have this happen again in other years. I know 1974 and 1977 come in mind. But this is one of those years where almost any other year, this record could be my number 1. But it can't be number 1 on this list because number 1 was also released this year. But my number 2 record for 1966 is Revolver by the Beatles. Look, this is just one of the most important records in history, period. It's daring, it's diverse, still melodic, and it still keeps that accessibility that the Beatles had, but heavily experimental as well. To quote one of my favorite Rate Your Music reviewers, if Rubber Soul marked the point in which the Beatles took a gigantic leap forward as songwriters, then Revolver represents a similarly gargantuan step in their evolution as music arrangers. This record is really when the Beatles became a sole studio band. They did still tour in 66, but being the last year where they stopped touring. The cover was designed by the great Klaus Vormann, who would go on to play on John's solo records, Ringo solo records, and George's solo records, as well as every other band in the 1970s. Obviously, I'm exaggerating there a little bit, but up to this point, and actually, I'm going to take that back. While there's one other Beatles record that holds the spot as my favorite Beatles record, what I would say about this record is, and probably more out of any other Beatles record, is it's their most cohesive and collaborative as well in their entire discography. And as far as songwriting goes, I mean, up until this point, you got a song like Tomorrow Never Knows, probably Lennon at his best at this point. McCartney's Eleanor Rigby, probably his best up to this point. And George Harrison, Taxman, probably his best song up until this point as well. And look, I don't care what anybody says. Yellow Submarine is just wonderful. I love it. Maybe it's just the child in me, but I love it. It's just pure bliss. I can't picture this song not on the record. Some of my other favorite tracks are the aforementioned Eleanor Rigby, John Lennon's I'm Only Sleeping, McCartney's Here, There, and Everywhere, which is just gorgeous, Lennon's drony She Said, For No One, and Dr. Robert. This record, thinking about my favorite track, though, I gotta go with Tomorrow Never Knows. There might be days where Here, There, and Everywhere is my favorite song. There are other days where I think She Said's my favorite song off this record, but I know deep down, gotta go with Tomorrow Never Knows. This track truly defines the word timeless. If I could take a time machine and go back in time just to see people's faces when they heard this song for the first time. This song is just so fresh. It's contemporary, even by today's standards. I could go on about this track. It is incredible. It's a 5-star song, and this whole record is a 5 out of 5 for me. That's my number 2. So here we are, number 1. Oh boy. So my number 1 record is a record that I've talked about before in another video that Rob and I did. And that's because not only is this record my number 1 record for 1966, but it just so happens it's my favorite album of all time. And that's Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. This record, I would say, is the soundtrack to my 20s. I got into the Beach Boys around 2015 when I was in college. And it was right around the same time I was really getting into the Beatles. I was listening to the Beatles and the Beach Boys as far back as 14, 15, but I never really appreciated both groups until my mid-20s. I talked about in the video where Rob and I talked about our favorite records of all time that my fiance and we planned a whole trip to Boston years ago around Pet Sounds. It was the 50th anniversary. Brian Wilson and Al Jardine were touring at the time. And the Boston show, they were playing with an orchestra. Couldn't get tickets for that show. We ended up seeing them in PA where they didn't have the orchestra, but it was still great. But we still did the Boston trip. And interesting enough about the Boston trip, it's actually where I bought my 50th CD Pet Sounds box set, as well as the vinyl release as well. This record just has a special place in my heart. And it's one of those records where my fiance and I could listen to together. And there are very few records where both her and I can really just listen together. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. This record just means so much to me. Not cutting it, or I'm not editing any of this segment out. I get really nerdy with Rate Your Music specifically, with rating records in my collection. And when I give an album 5 stars, there's usually 1 or 2 criteria that have to be met. I either have to have a personal connection with the record, so it's a record that I've been listening to for a long time, maybe not necessarily perfect, but perfect enough for me, where again, I just connect with it on a deep personal level. I think of albums such as Radiohead's OK Computer, the Flaming Lips' Soft Bulletin, or the Beatles' White Album specifically. The other criteria I have for giving a record a 5 out of 5 is if I just think it's a perfect record. I can't nitpick anything about it. I think of records like Yes is Close to the Edge, David Bowie's Station to Station, or even Television's Marquee Moon. Those records, to me, I just think are flawless. What puts Pet Sounds above them all is it meets both criteria. I have a deep personal, emotional connection to this record, but I just think it's perfect. It surpasses perfect. And it all comes down to the genius of Brian Wilson and what he did with the Wrecking Crew, but also how he sort of used the the Beach Boys as his backing band, which some members might love, may have not been too fond of at the time. A song like I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, without sounding cheesy or, whatever, cliche, I have a real personal connection with. I feel like I don't connect well with my generation, whether it's with pop culture or social media. That's just a track that's always really resonated with me. You've got both instrumentals, the title track, Pet Sounds, and Let's Go Away for a While, just gorgeous. Maybe on a compositional level, not even on a compositional level, on a technical level, maybe not anything too impressive as far as instrumentals go, but again, just gorgeous. Something that can only come out of Brian Wilson's brain. You got tracks such as the opener, Wouldn't It Still Be Nice? Probably my favorite album opener of all time. And it transitions beautifully to Still Believe in Me. You've got other tracks on this record, such as I'm Waiting for the Day, the closer, Caroline No, just drop dead gorgeous. As far as vocal performances go for Brian, I would say it's top notch, only behind songs such as Surf's Up and Till I Die. My favorite tracks are the entire record, tracks 1 through 13. But the one that stands above them all, also my favorite song of all time, would be God Only Knows. It's 2 minutes and 56 seconds of pure perfection. I don't know what else to say about it, other than it's Paul McCartney's favorite song as well, too. So I'll leave it at that. Take that for what you will, but yeah. God Only Knows. Pet Sounds. If you didn't figure it out by now, I give this record 5 out of 5. 5 stars. You know what? We'll just say 6 out of 5 in proper fraction. 6 stars. But yeah. 1966. So that's my list. I mentioned in our update video that we'll be taking a break. We won't go to 1967 next. We will actually jump all the way to 2021. I'm hoping to get that video out by the end of this month. And unlike 65 and 66, I will do a top 20 for 2021. And that's mainly because I just want to get as much new music out there as possible on this channel. I want to make it clear we are not a classic rock channel. We are simply a music channel. So that'll be the next list as far as this series go. And then after that, we'll have 1967. Also, I mentioned in the update video, we have some other exciting things that I'm doing on the channel as well. Hope to do more with Rob soon. And yeah, I think that's about it. We'll also have more updates as far as social media goes, so stay tuned for that. And that's about it, guys. So till then, we'll see you next time, and listen to these records. Bye, guys.